Good evening and welcome back to Entrepreneurial Communications and Influence. We are in our third class, so we're still fairly early in the program. To date, we've covered principles of communication. We've talked about some of the tools. We've talked about persuasion versus influence and the subtle differences there. And tonight we're going to start our discussion. It's going to be a couple classes talking about business models. So we're transitioning from the psychology, the behind the scenes, issues of communications into business, and then we're going to tie them all together as we go through the course. So tonight, before we go anywhere, I want to talk about how we transition into a business model discussion. So a business model is the core of how a business runs, right? It's its strategy, it's what differentiates it from other companies that it's competing with, it's what really makes it unique and interesting to the customer and therefore willing to spend money on it. All right? But in order to get to the business model, we first have to think about a couple of key issues. The first is we need to think about innovation. Our learning objectives tonight focus on innovation and variations of that. So we're going to learn the role of innovation within a corporate environment. We're going to talk about ongoing operations, kind of some behind the scenes stuff. How do we get the product and services out the door, and how does that play into what goes into a business model? We're also then going to talk about disruptive innovation, which is a variant on innovation that can make or break your company, quite frankly. I'm going to talk about some interesting examples where companies have just disappeared from the face of the earth because they were taken by surprise. Right? So we're going to talk about first mover, first company into a market or developing a certain kind of product. We're going to talk about fast follower company. So they're learning from that first mover and then quickly doing things a little better and following them. And then we're going to talk about how disruptive innovation plays into those things. Okay, so let's look at your typical corporate organization. The activities that go on to get the product or service out the door. The bulk of the activity is devoted to ongoing operations, right? I have to make the product, I have to ship it, I have to make sure customers are happy, I have to coordinate with the sales department, I have to make sure manufacturing is running. This is all part of ongoing operations. I have to send out invoices, right? This gets the actual operation off and running. And then in order for my company to survive over a longer period of time, I need to have some kind of incremental innovation. So I'm making some kind of improvement to my product or service, adding new features and functions, going after a different market segment, but I need to do some kind of incremental innovation. So some time is devoted to that. The problem comes in that most companies spend so much time on those two pieces that they don't take time to think about radical innovation, which is really something new and different that takes you by surprise and often can push incumbent players in a market, the ones already there, just completely off the map. So let's look at that in the context of new products. All right, we've got the whole vast universe of new things that we could be doing. On average, companies introduce about 250,000 products a year. Right? That's a lot of new products coming out around the globe. No wonder it's hard to think of something new, right? The problem is the failure rate, right? 85 to 95% failure rate. Why do you think the failure rate's so high?
They just copy each other?
A lot of competition, a lot of copying, so they're not differentiating. If you can't differentiate a product, what happens from a customer perspective? I look at two things that look the same. How do I decide what to buy?
Cheaper.
Exactly, I go for price. Competing on price is an ugly place to be because all that's going to do is reduce your margin. You have no money left then to pay employees or give them raises or to expand your business. Right? So we need to find ways that we can help you be part of that successful 5 to 15%, and that's why we do these courses. Okay, so let's talk about, I'm the first mover into a market. Right? Let's think about a couple of examples. Online books. Who's the first online book company? Anybody know? This goes back years.
Barnes and Noble.
Amazon's a good guess. Not. Amazon's been around a long time, but they were not the first online bookseller.
Barnes and Nobles.
Barnes and Noble, good guess. Barnes and Noble actually bought the company that was the first one, Books.com. Makes sense, right? Back in the early days of the web, you're going for that unique domain name, Books.com. They had that and didn't last very long. First MP3 player. Any guesses?
Sony.
Sony is a great guess. Japan has always been at the leading edge on electronics, but they were not the first in MP3 players. Any other guesses? iPod is a very good guess, of course, because that's one of the dominant pieces right now, but that's a latter-day innovation. 2 years prior to that, there was another company, Sihan Information Systems, who's now disappeared from the face of the earth. They couldn't manage it in MP3s, they tried to get into security networking, didn't make it there, and now they're gone. How about peer-to-peer file sharing, P2P file sharing? This is the stuff I tell you not to tell me about. The free files you download, the free movies, the free music, right? Those are peer-to-peer file sharing networks. Anybody remember who the first company was that really made this a big industry? Pirates Bay, that's today. They weren't around actually back in these early days. Napster, anybody remember Napster?
You heard of it?
Napster, yeah, exactly. Napster was huge. So Napster was peer-to-peer file sharing, people, individuals sharing files with each other for no fee. Okay, so who's going to be upset when I'm sharing music? It was mostly music driving it back in the early days. Who's going to be upset when I'm sharing music without paying any money? Who might be upset?
The music industry.
The music industry, so the recording studios, the artists, right? They're working very hard. That's their intellectual property is what we call it, right? And they're working very hard to produce that. There's costs associated with the creative part as well as the production side, right? And if you're just sharing, one person buys and 5,000 get it for free, right? It's hard to get your money back on your labor, your equity that goes into it. So Napster had been doing this, but the recording industry got very upset. And they came along and said, we're going to stick all our lawyers on you. And so a bazillion lawyers, came down on Napster, and within a couple of years put them out of business. So Napster actually recently became part of Rhapsody, so it's part of the paid music industry now. But Napster was a very big thing, and it proved that there was a demand for this peer-to-peer sharing of information, but also that there was a demand for digital music. This was the first time we saw a demand for digital music. And it was insane, because before then, people were using CDs. Prior to that, cassette tapes. Anyone remember cassette? 8-track tapes. We're going back into my very young youth. So this was the first time we saw digital music become a big thing. What happened is those companies got hit by a variety of things, including disruptive innovation. So let's talk about disruptive innovation in the context of Motorola's cell phone division. Anybody know where Motorola's cell phone division is at the moment, how it's doing? It is gone. It actually, Motorola doesn't have it anymore. They sold it. Anybody know to who? Google.
Google.
All right, Google's bought a hardware company.
Yeah.
Strange, huh? They were thinking part of their Android operating system, they need a hardware platform, let's put them together. Turns out Google's about to sell Motorola if they haven't already. So that didn't work so well. The problem is Motorola was doing what they should have been doing, but they weren't watching out for that little piece in the bottom of the pyramid, the bottom of the funnel we looked at, the radical innovation. It's disruptive, it's termed disruptive innovation when it takes a company or a group of companies by surprise and changes their business or puts them out of business or forces them to do business in a different way. Now, if we look at this example here, what we see is Motorola was actually doing what it was supposed to be doing in terms of ongoing operations. All right, so Motorola is making cell phones. All right, and they have incremental innovations, they add new features and functions. Here is the customer happiness, we'll call this the customer happiness line, all right, where they're willing to pay the price you charge. If you're below it, you're going to have to charge less. If you're above it, maybe you can get away with charging more. All right, so Motorola is doing its thing, but all of a sudden, things started to change. What came along in the technology spectrum that could have surprised cell phones? What came along after cell phones? BlackBerry. So BlackBerry came along the way. There was something before BlackBerry. What came along here?
Tablet.
Tablets are down here. Good example. That's a recent example. Right?
Palm Pilot.
Palm Pilot, exactly. Palm, for those of you who remember, or your parents probably had them, What was in a Palm Pilot?
Calendar?
Calendar, contacts, a little calculator. What was it missing?
Phone.
The phone. So Motorola did not care what Palm was doing. It wasn't doing a phone. Okay, so Palm does its incremental innovation thing. It grows into a big company. And then along comes BlackBerry. What did BlackBerry do?
Combine both
It
functions.
combined these cute little functions with a phone and with email. So its real claim to fame was it did email really well, but it also had the phone. Now Motorola had to start paying attention. But by now we're way down the technology development curve. What came before tablets, between BlackBerry and tablets?
The iPhone, smartphone.
Smartphones, exactly. All right, so when BlackBerry came along, Palm was like, well, that's nice, but that's not really what we do. People just want a focused little device. They didn't realize until it was too late, people really did want more integration, all right? So we're more integrated here. And then BlackBerry's go on doing its thing, and then all of a sudden the smartphones come along, all right? And now they're really essentially little handheld computers. Much more sophisticated. Yeah, they've got email, but they've got so much more. That whole app world that opened up changed the name of the game here, and now Motorola and plain old cell phones are gone. Nokia got caught up in this as well. Who bought Nokia? Microsoft.
Microsoft.
Microsoft needed a hardware piece to go with its OS. Palm is gone. BlackBerry is struggling, all right, and the smartphones are ruling the day, and now we have tablets coming into the picture. Tablets, what do they compete with?
Laptops.
So they're replacing, so they're considered disruptive innovation for laptops, which were developed way back here. All right, doing their thing, they competed with desktop computers, all right, did a great job, but then they got sideswiped. Oh, these little tablets, they're just what, e-readers, right? Do books, how many people have books on their little, yep, absolutely. And they've got a few apps, so they're kind of like a smartphone with an e-reader and a bigger screen. Now they're running actual applications. Now this is a disruptive innovation. So you see, as they added features, they got to this customer happiness line, and now they're disrupting prior technologies. Right? That's disruptive innovation, and that's why we need to pay attention to it. We need to make sure that we are doing our ongoing operations, our incremental innovations, and we're paying attention to radical innovation so we don't get swiped out of a market. Quick story, Apple and Steve Jobs. So Napster, go back to Napster, had just fallen, the lawyers had taken them down, right? Steve Jobs goes, I am going to save the day. Who did he go and talk to save the day? What did he do when the whole iPod iTunes combo came out in 2001?
Contracts.
Music.
So he went down to the music industry and said, you guys just killed Napster, but it turns out there is a demand. Remember we talked about there's a demand for digital music. You need to face the music, right? And get with the program, and I have a solution for you. Right? He signed contracts with the studio, which is, go back to the business model. This is one of the components of a business model, which we'll discuss further. Strategic partners. He partnered with the recording companies, and they made money, Apple made money, the app developers made money. It was a win-win for everyone to the tune of billions of dollars. All right, so quick summary. Innovation is a necessary component for a corporate strategy. You have to balance ongoing operations, innovation, incremental as well as radical. And being a first mover in a market doesn't guarantee success. You always have to be on top of your tippy toes. Success is not always due to a product improvement, but as we saw with the Apple iTunes example, it could be another component of the business model, strategic partners. All right? Yeah, iTunes was innovative, but what really made the difference was when Jobs signed up all the recording studios. Okay, so we're going to break into groups now, and we're going to actually start walking through the beginnings of the business model canvas, looking at innovations for your new business teams that you created and pitched last week.